What's up, guys? Hope you're well, hope you're good, hope you're having a good week. This week's pod is with Gaby Mendes. If you don't know her, she runs a podcast called the Talk Twenties podcast, and really it's more than that. She's building a media platform for people in their 20s to help them navigate their 20s and all those life experiences that come with that. Really exciting entrepreneur. I think she's going to go really far. She's got some really cool announcements coming. I think it'd be a really useful podcast for anyone who is like in a career and maybe doesn't feel it's like right for them, or there's something else they should be doing, because that's an experience that she went through. Also, anyone who wants to like build a media brand, media platform, and the early days of what that might look like, and how to like run a really amazing podcast on a budget and have success with it. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Drop a comment or drop me some feedback with what you think, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's dive into it. So Gabby, welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for making some time. First question is, are you out of your quarter life crisis yet?
Am I out of my quarter life crisis? I don't know. I think I keep believing that I am, and then something else happens and then I'm not. I'd like to think that I am. In many ways, yes. My quarter life crisis, I trained to be a teacher and realised that it really wasn't the calling for me. And so navigated via the event industry and then into entrepreneurial life over the past 5 years, I guess. And pretty much ever since leaving university, it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And so, yes, in many ways, I probably feel like less of a crisis, but starting a business of its own is another whole journey. So an interesting one. Yes and no in ways. Did you have a quarter life crisis?
I don't know about a quarter life crisis. I definitely think as your business is all about basically, in your podcast and your community, I definitely think the 20s is like a really exciting time, but also like an awful time for people, because you probably have a pretty easy ride until you're thrust into the real world, and then you're like, oh shit, what am I doing with my life, and like, am I doing the right thing? And I think that's that's probably always a constant throughout your 20s, right? There's maybe a lot of self-doubt. I don't know if I had a quarter life crisis. I've definitely recently had probably like a 30-year-old crisis. I turned 30 in October, and that gave like a big perspective on what I wanted to be doing in the next kind of like 5 and 10 years, having had the perspective of my 20s. And that's probably what's like spurred me to start a business. Your quarter life crisis was the catalyst for you starting a business, right?
100%, yeah. I came out of university, had no idea what I really wanted to do with my life. And I'd done a degree in education, but it wasn't like teaching you how to be a teacher. It was like, how do we learn as humans? How does culture impact how we learn? How is society made up? And it was all of these amazing, incredible lessons that I had. And none of it was about training to be a teacher, but pretty much 95% of my course still wanted to be teachers. And I was thinking, why am I the only one that doesn't really want to do that? And I toyed with lots of other ideas. I went to grad fairs and tried to get onto other grad schemes, and they're like, but you've got education as your degree, like, don't you just want to be a teacher? It was really hard to convince people. And so I guess I don't want to say I kidded myself, but I was like, well, everyone else thinks I should be a teacher. My mum thinks I'd be a great teacher. Maybe I should just go do it. And I just found myself not in the right place. It wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, and I knew that. And I think, you mentioned becoming an entrepreneur, and I think I had quite an entrepreneurial mindset, quite business head on my shoulders. But once you slot in as a teacher in the education system, there's a syllabus you have to follow, there's rules you have to follow, and I'm also really creative. And I think whilst you can channel a bit of that creativity into teaching, and the best teachers do that, I still couldn't get around the whole, how much is involved in teaching, and how it just didn't feel like a right fit for me. So So then I left teaching and I moved into corporate industry, and I moved into working in events, business to business trade shows and exhibitions. And I did that for about 2.5 years, but pretty much bang slap in the middle of that was the pandemic, and obviously events were no more. So it was a weird job to be in during the pandemic. And when things started amping up, I'd already started my business on the side. Basically, obviously we had reduced hours and stuff like that. I wasn't actually ever put on furlough, but I had my hours reduced. And in that meantime, I'd kind of grown my business alongside it. And then when it came to amping up and events coming back, I was like, I'm just ready to take the leap. I'm just ready to go all in. And I couldn't commit to what they were asking me to going back full time, because I'd filled my hours with so many other exciting things. And that was kind of where the career journey took me.
Yeah. So like, what was your original idea for this business? Like, how did that evolve through that period?
Yeah, really interestingly, actually. So when I was in my second year of teaching, so I did 2 years teaching, and in my second year, I was given a form of 6th form students. And the students were like 17, 18, looking like going on to university and stuff. And I'd only just graduated, really. I'd done like 1 year as a teacher. I was like 21, 22. So we weren't really that far apart in age, probably the difference between you and I, actually, which is wild. And they used to ask me questions like, Miss, what's a debit card? What's a credit card? You know, how do I go about, renting for the first time when I leave home? Like, you know, my mental health's not great. How do I manage that? Like, how do I decide what career journey to path to take? And I was like, there is no life skills information. It's not really taught well enough in 6th form. It's definitely not taught well enough in university. And then when you get thrust out into the outside world, it's a free for all. And at the time I was struggling myself with all of those questions that I didn't know the answers to and wanted help and support with as well. And I wanted to provide that community. And I thought, this is still education. This is still teaching people, but this is doing it in probably the most creative way I could possibly imagine. And so being in the events industry, which I navigated into after leaving teaching, ultimately I thought I wanted to do an in-person event. So I was like, got geared up. January 2020, launched Talk Twenties, and was like, we're going to do a great big event in June 2020. Obviously, by March 2020, events were no more. Couldn't even happen. Couldn't do it. So I had to pivot. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, was like, I think a podcast would be a really nice kind of build up to like what's going on in the at the event. Maybe we can like promo the event and stuff like that. So just give it a few goes. I started interviewing just my friends initially and people that I knew that I was inspired by, and it's just snowballed from there, really. And now the podcast is what we're known for, what Talk Twenties is known for. And yeah, I get to interview really inspiring, amazing young people and talk about this weird phase that no one really talks about, and the life skills that you have to learn and the lessons that you've learned along the way and the things you'd wish you tell your younger self and all of those things. So yeah, that's the backstory.
Yeah, it's really cool. And like, how do you, when did you realize that was like going to be a thing and going to be that was going to be the business, not events? And maybe events still will be like a part of the business now that we're through that period of COVID. But when did you realize it, like you were onto something?
I think the fact that I knew that an event would maybe come one day was probably what spurred me to carry on going with the podcast. That sounds like a crazy thing to say, but I think when you're not technically, like when you first start in podcasting, there's not a great amount of reward. You're clamoring for people to listen. You're trying to get your brand out there, and there are thousands being launched every single day. It's really hard to stand out. And I think for a long time, I was like, it's going to be, and it still is going to be so much more than just the podcast. And I think that's what allowed me to keep going with it, because I knew that there was bigger things aside from just the podcast, but that has ultimately become our main focus. And I think that's taken, honestly, 2.5 years to go, okay, actually this podcast stuff is going really good. Maybe we should just give it our full focus for a little while and then come back to the idea of the events and other like learning materials and stuff like that at a later date. So I think I was in denial for quite a long time that was actually what would be successful in the business, the power of podcasting.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about this before as well, where they're like, obviously you knew events, right? So that was kind of the angle you wanted to take. But another thing I've heard people mention is you kind of you say, well, I want to do this long term, but actually short term, how we're going to make money is through this thing which feels safer in a way, or something that maybe you know, when actually, yeah, the reality is that you actually would love for the podcast to be the main thing and to be the main breadwinner. Is that true of you, or is it less obvious?
I think so, definitely. I think the thing that the bit that I don't love about podcasting, and that's a weird thing because I love so many stuff about it, but the bit I don't love about it is that I actually don't get to see the people we're helping. I think that's the hardest part about podcasting, is that it's just numbers going up on the other side, and unless someone tags you in something or shares their story to you or something like that, you don't actually really know how you've impacted someone's day. And I know from listening to podcasts myself that I can listen to a podcast, it could be life-changing. That sounds dramatic, but it can. And you might, then I bump into people who listen to the podcast and they're like, this episode changed my life. And I'm like, but I don't get that feedback. And I think that's the hardest thing about starting a podcast. And I think that's probably why the events and other ideas like that appeal to me so much, because we did run a little event, a kind of a pilot event with just our core listeners back in October. We had about just a very small venue, 100 people. And it was just amazing to see people say, I love the podcast, and, I'm listening to it and I think this about it and I think that about it. And I think it's really hard to get that feedback. And I think when you do something in person, you can really see that. And I think that person, because they're immersed in it even more, benefits even more from something like that. So I think there's pros and cons to everything. But I think the scalability with podcasts is massive, and the opportunity at the moment is incredible. So that's why our focus is going to be primarily on the podcast for the next 12 months at least.
Yeah. And for someone listening to this, like, can you give an idea of like, how do you make money from a podcast? Because it seems like it could be one of those industries where the rewards go to like the top 1% who have got, hundreds of thousands of listeners. What is the reality for you? Like, how have you found that? How have you made money from it?
The obvious answer is sponsorship. And I think it's one of those things that you are probably right. It does go to the top 1%. But I think what I'm seeing now is it start to trickle down. I'm seeing brands start to go, okay, yeah, podcast is definitely a medium that we can invest in. I think it works very differently to social media. And I think it's about, when you're pitching to brands and companies, explaining that to them. I think they want to know, like, if someone, how many likes did a post, if they're working with brands and influencer creators and stuff, they want to know how many likes you get on a post, how many interactions and engagements and stuff like that. And they use that as their kind of, well, here's our ROI. Like, this is how we know whether it was a success or not. And I think when you scroll past a social media post, you're counted as an impression, but it's maybe not impacted you at all. Now, if you listen to a 45-minute podcast episode, and in the middle, the host is saying, I absolutely love this brand, and it's immersed, it's in your ears, you listen to it in your car, you're really fully listening to that podcast, and they say, I love this, and here's a discount code, or this is the brand. It's so much more valuable than scrolling past and those numbers, just impressions and stuff like that. And I think when you're initially pitching, it's about explaining that value to a brand that you're working with. And that's the ones that have invested in us. They've got to 100% believe in your mission as well. The same things you would do if you were creating content for them online. But I just think the power of podcasting is so great. So you have to warn them, the numbers aren't going to be what you're seeing in impressions on scrolling past on Instagram, but there'll be more high quality leads, I would say. So yeah, I think that's the challenges that you face as a creator in the podcasting world. Yeah.
So how do you go about getting those sponsorships? Do you do direct outreach? Like, what is the process?
I think in many ways it is definitely about being proactive and speaking to the brands you use every single day, and the ones that you love, and reaching out to them and stuff like that. We've had, quite a lot of brands reach out to us, and it's quite funny. They approach us and be like, can you do a social media post? And I'm like, why wouldn't you be interested in sponsoring the podcast? It's about flipping their mindset, sort of thing. So it's about turning those conversations that you're having, those relationships that you already have, into exciting opportunities. And I think if you're ambitious enough with what you're trying to do with your podcast, it's about taking those brands on a journey. So if you look at the likes of Stephen Bartlett, for example, and his main sponsor is Huel, he's grown that massively, so that Huel at the start, it probably was a little bit of a risk to be like, yes, I'm going to put my name to this and pay the big bucks and whatever, but look at the trajectory that he's gone on. So it's about proving that the investment for you is worth the growth, and that you'll kind of do that. So yeah, it's a tricky one to have that conversation and stuff, but I definitely think there is so much value like in podcasting, and we're really just scratching the surface. So I think for creators stepping into it right now, it's a really exciting time. But I'll be honest, completely honest, that for a long time of creating the podcast, that the financial reward was not there. And I think it was actually pushing through that barrier, working another job so that still working full time whilst that was going on, before I could actually go, okay, I can take the plunge now.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think there's that is one thing I've heard pitched really well, is like the upside of a podcast can be huge. I think some of the most popular podcasts, I don't know if it's like Serial, but certainly there's definitely a few case studies where a brand is like taking a risk and then and basically paid a flat fee to sponsor a podcast that's gone on to become like the top podcast in the world. And there is like that unlimited upside, and people are always probably going to be coming back to those episodes. So it's a really interesting one. And what, like, where are you at with the business at the moment? You're a one person business. How does that work?
I don't know how much I can actually say at this moment in time. I am currently, yes, a one person business, but I'm in the final stages of a really exciting deal, and where we're going to grow quite fast. So yeah, it's a big period of growth that I'm in at this moment in time. Essentially, I'm very lucky to be backed by someone who really sees the vision of where this is going. And the plans we have are really, really exciting. So yeah, I've been a solo. So I took the leap almost a year ago now in July to leave my full-time job and work on this, independently. I work with freelancers, volunteers and stuff like that, to build the brand to what it is now. But like 95% of what you see is probably me in my back bedroom doing all the work. So, that's probably not going to be the case for too much longer though. So yeah, exciting things are in the pipeline.
That's cool. I definitely think, so looking at what you're building, I mean, it'd be interesting to know how you describe it, but I kind of see it as like, it's a media brand where you have a really, really interesting niche, which is people in their 20s who are underserved at the moment for information on, navigating their 20s, whatever that might be, like buying a house, finding a job, dealing with things in their personal life. And actually, platforms like that are so undervalued, and you see there is this trend at the moment of media brands which are massively undervalued being acquired by companies, or you just gave the example of the Stephen Bartlett partnership with Huel, right? There's so little like good content and good media platforms out there at the moment that have a really like good connection with their audience. So excited to see where you can take it. Where do you see this going? Like, because it could be really big, couldn't it?
So the ambition is quite simple. It's to be the biggest platform for 20 somethings nationally, and if not worldwide. That is what we want. And there isn't anyone really serving that specific demographic, but we want to be the ones that people go, if you listen to the latest episode, or you're struggling in your 20s, will the Talk 20s website help out? Like, we want it to be known that when you graduate, that's your support system, that's your network, that's what you can tap into. So for me, it's about building a team that can support that. At the moment, it's mainly just been me, and I want to have, more diverse voices and other people involved within the company to appeal to everyone. I think at the moment we sit largely in our audience sits largely female. And so we're hoping to kind of broaden that out a little bit more, and introduce new voices to the podcast that might appeal to other people as well. So that's kind of one key thing. But for me, I'm really excited about this opportunity that is coming up for us. And we're still very much going to be based in the northwest of the UK, which is where we are now. But yeah, like you say, growing into a media brand that people know, love, rely on for their information that they need. And I think coming from a teaching background, that's how I've managed to establish it up until this point. But getting in experts and it's going to be huge. And I kind of see, big events, lots of content that people can tap into. And then the podcast, we're really hoping to get some of the biggest names in the UK to share their experiences of navigating their 20s.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about having like a massive vision? There's a lovely saying, I think I've heard a guy called Rich Antonella, he like lives his life by this, which is like thinking big even when like the actions you're taking are small. It sounds like that's very much like how you think and act, right? Which is you have a huge vision, and then each day you're taking, maybe like the steps you're taking initially are small, but you're working towards something much bigger. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you have that attitude?
100%. I think I've had that from day one. I've known what I wanted this to be from day one. And it's like probably what I imagined the platform to be at day one is probably where I'm at right now. But where I'm now pitching where I want the brand to be is like 100 times bigger than where it is right now. So I think it's always about having those big dreams, big aspirations and stuff like that. And I think it's also, especially with what I'm going through right now, it's about having people around you that make you dream even bigger. Like the stuff when I first sat down to have these conversations, it's like, we want to do X, Y, Z with this. Like, how do you feel about that? And it's like another 3 times bigger than I'd even imagined in my head. And I'm thinking, whoa, that's a lot. And I think you're right. You go into the mode of like, gosh, that's about 1 million mini steps I'm going to have to take to get to that point. Gosh, is that going to take forever to get to where I want to go? But I think it's about having people who go, I think you can get there. I believe in that you can get there, and helping you along the way. So yeah, having a big vision is a really amazing thing. And then it's about getting your head down and doing the small steps that are going to get you there every single day, and not falling out of love with it because things aren't moving as fast as you like as well. I think I've definitely had times where that's been difficult. But yeah, the big vision, so important.
Yeah. And you just said times you've fallen out of love with it. Take me to a time where you've fallen out of love with it.
I think when you're sat there editing a podcast at 10 p.m. at night, and you know that it's coming out the next morning, but you also know that you have to start a job for someone else the next morning as well. And on your lunch break, you have to market that episode, and then you have to do all your emails to line up the next guest, everything in your lunchtime, and then you have to go back to the job in the afternoon that you were doing. And then in the evening you break and you maybe record another podcast and you get ready for the week ahead. That was the reality of what it's been to get to this point. Like, it's been a lot of hard graft. And it got to a point where I was like, I can't switch off and work for someone else. And follow this dream. So I think then there was another challenge. It was like, obviously there's the financial worries about how you're growing a business and taking that gamble, and you haven't got your set paycheck every single month, and your, everything that you've relied on. And then it's a whole new bunch of challenges that are coming your way. So I think at every single point you're going to face challenges. And this is probably the universe testing you. Like, are you ready for this? Are you ready for what this can be? Like, can you survive the hard times? And I've never got to the point where I've fully felt out of love with what I'm doing. I think because my mission is so strong in my mind, like why I'm doing this, why it's so important to help these people, because I was in such a low place when I was teaching, and I was like, is this life? Because I don't want to do, if this is adult life, I'm checking out, see you later. But I know that that's not the case. And I've managed to find something I'm super passionate about. And I also see it as a privilege. I'm very, very lucky to be to have had an idea, to have been able to have acted on it, and to now call that my full-time job. So now I don't ever take that for granted. I'm, you know, hugely, hugely grateful for the position that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool to hear you say that. I mean, I'm fairly new to this. I'm like 2 months in. But I would say like the energy I get every day is like so good, compared to, and I had like a very privileged career before this. I had like 6 or 7 years working in high growth startups where you have a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of fun to be had, and you're kind of like breaking new ground every day. But ultimately, I was probably always chasing earning as much money as possible. And the next big deal, I worked in sales. And one of the reflections I had when I hit 30 was like, what have I been optimizing for the last 6-7 years? And it probably wasn't like the purpose on the day to day of just feeling like this energy I feel right now, which is really kind of fulfilling and purposeful energy, as opposed to maybe the energy that was driving me before was maybe more about chasing certain like monetary goals, or, you know, there's always like another big deal or another big opportunity, but those things, they don't give you the same kind of energy day to day. It's kind of like a real kind of like short-term energy, whereas this energy I feel at the moment is like a lot more sustaining. What do you and who do you like take inspiration from when you're thinking about your business?
That's a really great question, because I think at the start I could have listed you a bunch of things that I saw inspiration from. But on a recent podcast, actually, I spoke to Ben Gallagher, who's the co-founder of Lux Collective, and he's also probably like he's a little bit further down the line. I think he's been doing it for 4 years, and I'm like 2.5 years in. And he now says that sometimes there are certain people that he turns to, but sometimes seeing what other people are doing is a massive distraction to his own vision, because it's so clear what they want to do now. And I think when I was really struggling with, okay, I have this idea, but how am I going to execute it? Then looking around at what everyone else was doing was really, really helpful, because it was really good for inspiration. Now that I kind of know the path that I'm on and I know what I need to do to execute, actually having people in, you know, looking to other people for what they're doing is somewhat distracting. So I'd probably say like I have like doses and stuff like that where I really tune into things that I'm inspired by. But actually I think the things that keep me motivated, and probably the best thing that's happened, was actually just like having a break, like taking a break from my business, because I'm so in it all the time. I probably see inspiration everywhere without even realizing it, that actually sometimes just going for a walk in nature or going on holiday recently where I completely switched off was just a way to just open my mind and be inspired by other things that made me think more open-minded. Because I think you can definitely get in your blinkers, you can see the 3 people in your industry that are doing similar things and you're like, I just want to be like them. And actually that way you don't then carve out your own path. So I think it's about having your key people that you find inspiration from, but then also knowing the special sauce that you have that you can sprinkle on everything that makes you unique. So yeah, I can't pinpoint one person and be like, I want to be like that, because I probably see inspiration from so many places now without even realizing.
Yeah. Let's just dive into your podcast here, because I got to ask this, right? We were just talking about one of my clients before who's like a top 10 podcast in the UK. Mm-hmm. And the production value of what they produce, I don't think it's as good as what you produce, right? And you're one person team. Yeah, I'm legit. Like, just the audio and the video and just the look and feel is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. How have you done that?
Thank you. I invested in a studio quite early on, and it was a gamble. Like, you're paying out money for a podcast and you're not even bringing in that much. Like, it was at the beginning, everyone thought I was absolutely crazy. But I, again, believed in this massive vision. I was like, it's the right decision. And I'm very fortunate that the guys at Liverpool Podcast Studios have helped me build that vision and create that brand identity. And then, yes, like I say, most of the branding is what I've put together, and editing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's it's important. And I think we are also obviously following trends at the moment. Clips from podcasts and stuff like that are going massively viral on TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. So it is about keeping up with trends and what's going on. But I also have a strong sense of what I want this podcast to be. And I care so much about the experience for a guest that I have a whole like procedure for getting a guest on the podcast. So it's not just rock up on the day, have a little chat on the podcast. There's a whole thing behind it. So we have a research call with every single guest. We sort out their travel, whatever is needed. We catch up with them I catch up with them before the podcast, get to know them on a more personal level, so that the first time we're not having a chat is when the microphones get turned on. We head over to the studio, we get all set up, we get comfortable, and then we dive into the podcast episode. And obviously between that, they've received a brief and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, when you're dealing with PR teams and people who represent other people and stuff like that, it's really clear to have a process that you're working people through. And I think that just the time and care that goes into that is probably different than other podcasts as well. It's not just like, you're here, let's switch the mics on. It really is an experience. And I want them to be able to look back at that and go, that was a great day. I loved that conversation, because then your guest is going to talk about it when they post it on their socials and stuff like that. So I think there's so much more that happens behind the camera than just the look, feel, or the post that you see.
That's awesome. That is so cool. I'm like, one thing with this podcast is I was like, let me get to like 5 or 10 episodes remote, and then we'll up the production quality, like once you've earned it. But I'm super inspired, and I think is like the way you promote yours with the clips. And yeah, everything just comes across as like a really highly produced thing, which is ultimately, right, people, they come on podcasts, they're not just coming on because they want to have a chat. They want to get something out of it. So if you can give them, as you say, an experience where there's like basically nothing they've got to worry about in terms of getting to it, and then out of it they get some like really nicely produced content that they can use themselves.
You know, the best thing that happened.
Yeah.
The best thing that happened the other day is one of our latest guests, she messaged me the other day saying, "Oh my God, Gabs, I owe you 100,000%. And I said, "What's up?" And she's like, "I've just been contacted by a TV producer based on them seeing me on the podcast."
Amazing.
That's what we're working with here. And she's like, "This is incredible. I'm so grateful." Like, you know, and I'm like, that's all you. Like all we did was allow her the opportunity to shine on the podcast. We just gave her the right environment to be able to do that. But other people are seeing it and going, okay, this is good for this and this is good for that. And I know that all that positive energy will end up coming back round to the podcast as well. Like, so for me, like the high production value has been worth the investment, but is definitely a gamble for someone just starting out in their podcast. So you really have to 100% believe in that vision, eat, sleep, breathe it.
Yeah. It's having that like abundance mindset, isn't it? As opposed to like the fear mindset. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. All right, let's wrap up with a couple of recommendations. So we kind of already touched on this, but like, yeah, who would be like your recommended follows? Who do you follow and look up to at the moment on social media?
Definitely Ben, who I've just had on the podcast, Ben Gallagher. He has a platform called Lux Collective. They're based in Liverpool and they sell pre-loved luxury fashion. And his content is just amazing. Like, I didn't even really know about pre-loved luxury fashion before I started following them. And now just the way he delivers his content is incredible. I think there's so much opportunity on TikTok at the moment. So we've got Mimi Darling Beauty, who's coming up in a couple of weeks on the podcast as well. She's since October last year. She now sits at 3.2 million followers on TikTok. And that's just from her being her authentic self. She is just being her and being consistently her, and just putting out lots of content and videos and trying different things and stuff like that. And I just think that is so inspiring. So I think the more in the podcasting space, it probably is the likes of Stephen Bartlett, Jake Humphrey, High Performance Podcast, Fern Cotton. They were definitely all the ones that inspired me to get into the industry initially. You know, these kind of podcasts that are really like top of the game. And I hope that we can be there one day too. I really do feel passionate about that as well. But yeah, there's so much inspiration out there. And I think it's just about finding the ones that you feel you're most aligned with and making sure you support them as well.
Awesome. All right, Gabby, let's wrap it up there. It was really fun talking to you.
It was great talking to you. Thank you for having me.